So I've been playing The Witcher 3 on my Switch for the last few days, and while I haven't finished it as I do with just about every other game I review, I did want to do this pseudo port review. I haven't beaten the campaign or expansions on Switch, I did on PS4 back in 2015, but I have clocked in over 25 hours in the last 4 days or so, and it's a technical masterpiece. Despite being the third game in the series, Witcher 3 can still be jumped into as your first time in the series. You'll be rewarded of course for knowing previously known faces if you played the first two games, but not much is lost in terms of its campaign if this is your jumping off point. The Witcher 3 boils down to a quest to find the whereabouts of your surrogate daughter, Ciri, and though it sounds simple enough, Witcher 3 feels like a long fetch quest. I want to elaborate though because fetch quest has this very negative connotation, and while it does still feel like one, the world and characters it takes place in is vastly fascinating. Throughout the campaign, you play as Geralt, a witcher or monster slayer for hire who does favor after favor in return for more information on the whereabouts of his daughter. While the journey is a tedious one, the missions to more information are kept engaging by well-written characters. This is a living and thriving world, further grown by the choices you make. The constant dialogue choices given to you will have a real-world effect not only on future scenarios, but on the people in that area. These are characters I increasingly grew invested in, and seeing the effects of my early in-game choices by the end of the game was riveting. When The Witcher 3 was originally released on PS4, Xbox One, and PC in 2015, I thought that while it didn't have the strongest story, it had an endless amount of interesting characters all in a world I wanted to explore. It raised the bar for a lot of RPGs, and even 4 years later, this complete edition with 16 free DLC packs and 2 paid expansions all included in a single cartridge on arguably some much weaker hardware, well, it's a sight to behold. The Witcher 3 on Nintendo Switch is a straight port of the original game and DLC. No new fancy Switch features like HD Rumble, gyroscope controls, or anything like that. This is just the original experience with the ability to play it in dock and in handheld mode. Having this on Nintendo Switch is impressive enough, but what shocks me is the file management going on with this release. If you're buying this physically, this entire package fits into a single 32GB cartridge, no additional downloads needed. If you're playing this digitally, it's roughly 31.2GB. For comparison, the complete package on PS4 is roughly a 70GB file. Regardless of how the actual gameplay is, Saber Interactive's effort to port this experience to Nintendo's handheld is astonishing, especially considering that these are the people that worked on the NBA Playground series. Anyway, how does the actual gameplay hold up? Well, Witcher 3 became a staple RPG in 2015, and the foundation it laid back then continues to be some of the best in the genre. Taking place in a large, thriving world filled with diverse people and cultures, I found myself constantly getting off the main campaign's path to get lost in its side quest. These side quests only help elongate the already long 100-hour campaign, but they never felt like side quests because they weren't treated as such. These are just other stories that don't pertain to finding your daughter, but they don't feel any less important. The RPG mechanics like leveling up Geralt, crafting new oils, and so on feel as approachable as they were in 2015. However, some of these elements are used in interesting ways that further sell the whole monster slayer character. Certain items and elements help take out certain monsters, and so researching and learning about the world is as important as fighting to level up Geralt or building the best weapon set. Witcher 3's weakest gameplay point does continue to be the combat, and that's mostly because of its sluggish nature. Geralt sort of controls like a tank at times. His response to my attacks have a feeling of heft and momentum to them at the cost of not being snappy, and that does hurt the gameplay. It's not enough to say it's bad, but it's a noticeable blemish in comparison to everything else in the package. Let's not beat around the bush here. The Witcher 3 on Switch isn't the ideal way to play. It's acceptable and a way to play, but not how I'd recommend playing this for the first time. With that being said, even with the compromises made to get this to work, I'm impressed. Witcher 3 on Switch does have to go through a lot of compromises. Quality of textures are low, foliage is static, and poppin' comes in at an abundance. There's no shortage of drawbacks here to get the experience running on Switch. Likewise, I'm surprised that there are other features still here. The lighting system creates some beautiful looking moments in the scenery despite how blurry it can get. The way water ripples and interacts while you swim through it is lovely in practice. There's this constant back and forth between drawbacks and surprises. I guess I expected this to look even worse than it actually does, and so when it has these moments of beauty, I'm pleasantly surprised. I found myself turning off the HUD a few times just to get lost in the world. As for performance, Nintendo Switch runs Witcher 3 at a dynamic resolution of 720p, occasionally dipping to 540p in more demanding areas while in dock mode. This is all while targeting the same 30 FPS mark that the base PS4 and Xbox One S have. The difference is that you'll see more frequent dips to 25 frames per second. In handheld mode, the resolution more often hovers around 500p, and despite the blurry visuals, being on a smaller screen makes the experience look better. I found the Switch's display to better hide some of the blemishes like the pop-in or low quality textures that are blown up in dock mode. For that very reason, I found myself playing in handheld mode more than dock mode. When talking about the story, I mentioned Witcher's increasingly interesting cast of characters and personalities, and those are performed exquisitely throughout the story. Doug nails his performance as Geralt, while Denise slays as the badass Yennefer. The music throughout Witcher 3's campaign is captivating and mood-setting. I don't want to downplay its importance, but I found it to be most appealing in the most subtle moments. Hearing strings be strummed along with the ambient noise of everyday city folk, running their shops and working on weapons, it sells that feeling of a living world. That's the charm of Witcher as a fantasy RPG. It's a fantasy world that encapsulates you through its many presentation factors, music and ambient noise design being a prominent one. Witcher 3 on Nintendo Switch is a marvelous technical feat. It by no means should run on Switch, nor should it run as well as it does on Switch, and yet it does. That's not to be mistaken for saying the Switch port is the definitive way to play. Yes, it's amazing to play Witcher 3 on the portable, but it's not the best way to play. Just a convenient one that offers an acceptable experience. I would have loved this version to offer Cloud Sync with Steam to have it complement the PC version or other versions if possible. That would have been fantastic and would make this an easier recommendation as a second dip, rather than just to pick up if you literally only have a Switch.